Welcome to the Harvesting Wisdom podcast. Together we explore the vast landscapes of life, delving into the rich soil of experiences, sowing the seeds of curiosity, and harvesting the profound wisdom that each episode unfolds.
Hi, my name is Dr. Joe Roselle. I am the host for Harvesting Wisdom today, and we have a really exciting guest, Dr. Sara Rosenberg from University of California, UC Berkeley, correct?
University of California Natural Agriculture and Natural Resources,
Okay,
ANR.
that's a mouthful. She brings a practical view of what it takes to support regenerative farming and which transitions through research, advising on the ground projects. In this episode, we'll explore the challenges of growers, communities face, and also we're going to start with just a working definition of regenerative farming because I didn't realize this before I logged on with you. Even the name is controversial. So let's start with that, Dr. Rosenberg.
Yeah, great. I get this question a lot, and with having the term regenerative agriculture in my title, I kind of get a lot of questions around, well, what does it mean? Because as we know, it's kind of a very popular term currently. It's a bit buzzy, right? And there is no universal definition of regenerative agriculture. There's a lot of diversity of perspectives with it, right? Around use of synthetic inputs versus, having organic as the baseline. Is it practice-based or is it outcome-based? There's a few certifications out there that have their own definition. I'm coming from California, and California has a certain state policy definition. And so, it becomes very confusing for people. I tend to run with the California Department of Food and Agriculture definition because it is meant as a programmatic definition and it is geared to be inclusive, right? So in general, we state it as an integrated approach to farming and ranching. It's rooted in ecological principles, and it is aimed at achieving soil health, biodiversity, and ecosystem resilience, which leads to improved outcomes. We also emphasize that it's not an endpoint, but it is a continuous process along a spectrum. So it is a mouthful, right? And it's really hard to get a concrete definition. But I do think, thinking about it, integrated approach to farming, it's rooted in ecological principles, aimed for soil health, biodiversity, and ecosystem resilience are some of the big hitters.
Okay, so I knew you were going to be a great guest, but you're already answering the questions before I ask them. So, what I think you just identified was the commonalities of the definitions, which is great. It also sounds to me like the definition really depends on the context,
It
which
does.
happens in a lot of different fields. So it depends on how you're using it or how you're applying it. And just like anything else with farming or any other industry, there's regulations. So what I'm really interested in about is your role as somebody that comes in and advising. So, talk to me a little bit about that first. Are these people that are looking to transition into regenerative from conventional farming? What does that advising look like?
Yeah. Well, I'll take a step back because I want to just piggyback on your statement that looks different for every context, and that is absolutely true. Um, you know, some of the key for regenerative systems is that it's built around these ecological principles, which then guide management. And so, based on what system you are in, whether that's a perennialized system, an annual system, a rangeland system, how you adopt practices is going to be really based on all of those differences across the systems. And I cannot be an expert in all of those systems, right? Although my job description is more blanket across a region, right? I serve in 3 different counties in California, and within those counties, there's a very diverse there's very diverse types of agriculture, but I cannot be an expert in everything. So my program is a bit more centered currently on tree crops, right, and orchard systems in what we would call the San Joaquin Valley. So particularly thinking about almonds, pistachio, walnut, a little bit of stone fruit. Um, and those are the systems of which I'm currently working with. Um, I am an extension advisor. And so while I do provide advice to growers, my main focus is to build a research program, right, to evaluate how these integrated approaches to farming impact a lot of different important outcomes regarding economics and the environment, as well as agronomic um, outcomes. And so, what is so special about my position is that, you know, this is a group of um, growers that have largely been ignored by the UC system and by extension in the past. And so we don't have a very robust bank of research that shows some of the implications of these systems. And so while I can provide advice, what I really do is I lift up the growers who have been doing this for a really long time and try to create space for them to be trainers in their community because they are the experts and they really have the experience with these systems. And so my role is really to extend research and in evidence-based ways and talk about that and how it can be applied and the farm, and then to work with growers on the technical side to support transitions. So if a grower is conventional and they're interested in trying cover crops and bringing in sheep for grazing, rather than me being the only person to provide advice, I'll connect them to some contract grazers. I'll connect them to some growers who have been doing this for a long time so they can share their experience. And then I'll provide some knowledge on myself of what I know about these systems. So it's really a community-driven practice rather than just myself alone.
And I love your answer because what I find a lot of times when I'm talking to other nonprofits on any type of sustainable practice is that sometimes they get isolated and they don't understand systems thinking. So it sounds to me like that's a big part of what you're doing. That yes, we want to make a shift, but we have to consider the economy. So a lot of what we're doing with soil in Arizona, we want to make sure that that's part of the narrative as well, because the reality of it is if they can't make money off it, it's not sustainable. So thank you so much for narrowing the focus a little bit. I think what I'm really the most intrigued on is you're going to work with these farms in you know, specifically these orchards. What are some of the biggest challenges you see with a farm that wants to switch from conventional and we'll stay in your expertise to more of regenerative practices?
Yeah, barriers to adoption and challenges are many, and they're complex. Um, I'll I'll start with what I hear from a lot of growers who are interested in this is some of the biggest challenges come from what I would call the um, transitioning experience. And I get a lot of kind of the metaphor around it's like a domino effect where they try to adopt a couple practices and then there's all of these negative trade-offs that they weren't expecting. And then all of a sudden they have to change everything. We're used to an industry standard farm kind of um, or you know the term you're using, conventional farm, we're used to a very prescriptive approach to things where growers are really like they know when to do XYZ. They know when to come in for their applications. They know when fertigation is taking place. They know roughly when there's irrigation, you know, and they have a script for themselves. And then all of a sudden, when you're introducing these nature-based practices, that script kind of goes away and you have to adapt. You'll have trade-offs with things like bringing in a cover crop, and depending on where you are and the type of cover crop you're using, you could have a really big trade-off with gophers, ground squirrels, voles. You're all of a sudden having to manage your tree berms differently in order to maintain irrigation lines that are on the ground. You have to, depending on the cropping system, if you have off-ground harvest, you have to manage that ground cover in a way where you can have essentially a clean floor to do that harvest. I'm talking about almonds specifically. So it's like this, rather than just thinking about, oh, I'm just going to integrate some cover crops, this year and see how that goes. It's like this whole shift in practice that growers have to adapt to. And it can become really, really stressful for them. So oftentimes that what I, mentioned as the transitioning experience is the biggest hump to get over. The
Yeah,
other
and
one,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh no, follow up with that.
I was going to
Go
say
on.
that that's such an interesting insight, and when we've talked to farmers about it, they understand the economic impact, because if they fail at any of these junctures or roads, they lose their livelihood. They might lose their farm, so that's pretty traumatic. And I love what you said about. I think what you're referring to is almost a learning curve. If you have to use ecological practices, you have to know what they are.
Mhm.
Some farmers we talk to really don't have a working understanding, or they're not experts in soil or the biology that happens into the soil. Very few people are. But in order to do it right and understand why you're putting things down at a certain time or using some of these practices, you have to have a working understanding of all these systems. And that's a massive learning curve.
Yeah, absolutely is. And I like to use the term eco literacy and adaptive management, where you really have to, move away from that prescriptive approach and understand, why am I putting this cover crop here? What am I trying to achieve, right? And in order to know what you're trying to achieve, you have to have a better understanding of the biology of your soil, an understanding of what are those living roots doing for me. What is it doing to the soil structure and to the soil communities, and how is that changing my nitrogen cycling? um, and so it's a big shift in terms of knowledge. Absolutely, it's a big shift. Hmm.
So we kind of talked about the technical knowledge. Are there any big financial barriers? I know that when we've talked to some farmers about, and I think it was wheat, they talked about new equipment that they had to purchase. But then they talked about the trade-offs. Well, I actually saved more in not using fertilizer. But to somebody that might not have that capital available, that might be a financial barrier. Do you see anything like that when you sit down and talk to folks?
Yeah, I mean, this is not new information. Barriers to adoption across the board for cropping systems, in every scale. Equipment is one of the biggest ones, right? And especially for these systems, when you're set up for, again, I'll use the example of almonds. When the industry is set up a certain way, and you're required to have these outrageously expensive machines, right, for harvest. And in order to do that harvest, the setup is that you're sweeping them off the floor. Um, all of a sudden, if you're now thinking in the mindset of more of a regenerative farmer, and you're thinking, well, I want to maintain soil coverage, I want to maintain um, forage, understory growth, rather than having these clean alleyways. Well, now that becomes a really big challenge for the type of harvesting equipment that you have. And so the there's a few farms, not many in California. I mean, I can count them all on one hand, that have been able to invest in off-ground harvest equipment. And that
Oh, well.
has been a game changer for them, that allows them to really push the biology of their farm a lot further. And there is no easy access to that equipment. The average grower is not going to be able to invest in that equipment. And it's the same thing for even the smaller pieces of equipment, something like some type of attachment to support um, mowing, and a different size drill seeder to drill seed, and just all of the nuances that need to change, and what the equipment changes are that go with that, are extremely difficult for growers to figure out.
And I'm not a farmer. I drive by a lot on the way to work, but one of the things I realized too, in having lots of conversations, is scale matters. So depending on the scale of your operation, this might be easier to implement at a certain scale. What have you found when it comes to that? I would guess it's probably easier for small scale. When it comes bigger, then it's more challenging, but that might not be the case. So what are your insights?
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenges exist for the small and the medium and the big. It's just different challenges. Yeah. In some ways, for small scale farms here, and again, we have these conversations in California. What is considered a small farm? What is the definition of small farm? And California doesn't have a great answer to that. And we used to do things like it's based on income level rather than size of farm.
Oh.
And that sort of flows, but sort of doesn't. My region, I come back to the context of my region because that's where I work. We have a lot of really small farms that are like diverse vegetable production, for example, on 10 acres or less, direct to market. They're not really wholesale. And so in my repertoire, these are small farms, and their challenges, they don't own land, they lease, right? And so their decision making for long-term investments on that land is going to be very different than someone that owns the land. They're coming in oftentimes as where English is a second language. And so being able to have access to technical assistance providers, and understanding of policy and regulation, they tend to be the last to know. So again, it's challenges exist for both sizes. It's just what those challenges are very different.
Now you have a unique perspective. You're in the community. You're driving research. What are some of the, if you had to think of a star pupil, and you don't have to name a person, but what do you think the best attitude or approach is in making this transition?
Um, Not caring what other people think.
Okay.
A lot of things that I hear from growers is like, man, when I was doing this, all my neighbors were just laughing at me, right? Because my grounds, my orchard floors looked so messy, and they were just like, "What are you doing? You're gonna have so many problems." And they were kind of scoffing at them, or so there's a lot of cultural pressure. The other one is the family side. So, my father has been doing it this way, and I'm trying as the younger generation trying to come in and maybe do things a little differently. There's pressure to maintain the status quo. Um, so those are some of the stories that I hear from people that they really get a lot of public criticism for kind of being the early adopters willing to do something different. Yeah.
Yeah, and you bring up again something that's really important. I mean, it's when you think of a farm, we think of food, but we're not incurring the risk. They're incurring the risk, so I think that's important. Let me ask you kind of a different question. When you walk onto a farm and you've heard that they've made this transition, what are some of the things that you see where you feel like, ooh, they're on the right track, or oh my gosh, fire, fire, fire?
Um, yeah, I mean, I love when I get to see sites that are really pushing ground um, cover. So right now in orchard systems, it's an opportunity, particularly in orchard systems, because we already don't till, right? Or tillage is very minimum relative to an annual system, which is one of the principles of minimizing disturbance. Um, and so I really think there's an opportunity to build these practices in with orchard systems. And a lot of them, could be discussed as like agroforestry systems. But what I love is when I walk into a farm and an orchard and I see ground cover from berm to berm, right? It's very, very common that we have some type of either resident vegetation um, or, growers are trying cover crops more and more as incentive programs have been pushing them for a really long time in California, and research has been nonstop on cover crops forever. Um, but that's still just in the alleyways, right? And sometimes it's just like a couple feet of strip of cover. And so that's great, right? I always, like I said before, it's a spectrum. It's a spectrum of transition, but it's also a spectrum of like how many practices are you stacking on each other, and it's a spectrum of how those practices are implemented. Um, and so I love seeing any type of ground cover in the orchard. But when I walk into an orchard and I see ground cover from berm to berm, right? That tells me that this person is really, really like pushing their biology and they're really on the right track for building a regenerative system.
Oh, that's fantastic. When we were at the Jackson Family Vineyards doing podcasts there, they took us on a tour and it was fantastic. There were two things that they were really concerned with. One of them was water. So they did an innovative practice where they actually used their wine vats when they weren't distilling to catch water, which I thought was great. But they also incorporated sheep. And it was interesting because it talks about one of what we saw was a problem that we never would have guessed in a million years. Well, one of the cover crops they had eventually gets the cover crop gets too hard for the sheep to eat because it's too coarse, so they had to switch to goats. So, what are some of the innovative practices you've seen with innovating sheep or goats to help manage some of the cover crops in the orchards that you've seen?
Yeah, I think so. Okay, trying to always like connect back to principles, right? So one of the ecological principles for regenerative agriculture is integrate recycling and diverse manure and compost when possible. And that is also oftentimes spoken as integrate animals, right? Integration of animals when possible. And I think it's absolutely true that we need to redesign our agricultural systems in a way where we're optimizing these two realms. And I'll talk about it, integrative crop livestock systems, right? Particularly where I am, livestock is a huge sector, and orchard systems are a huge sector, right? And so optimizing both of those together is an opportunity, and we're getting a lot more. We're seeing a lot more interest in it. It's another one that's like not going to be the first go with people who are dipping their toes in these practices. They're not going to leap into doing grazing in their orchard systems. That's kind of after some years of being involved in these communities of practice that are doing this and maybe trying compost plus cover crops out, or integrating a hedgerow or doing something else. Usually then they'll start thinking about sheep. But sheep are becoming of interest, and usually it's used with through a contract grazer, because it's not often that orchard producers are going to have their own livestock. That's a whole secondary operation to invest in. So they'll contract someone to come in and graze their orchard for them. And the oh man, this is one of my favorite topics. I could go so many places with it. I'm going to try to stay on course though with what your question was. In general, just bringing sheep into the orchard is the innovation in itself, right? There's people who are really pushing the envelope, and they've got mixed livestock going on, where they have both sheep and then goat and pigs, or cattle, or there's some really big creativity there. There's also those that are more specific in terms of in my young orchard or in my olives, I use poultry, right? Rather than bringing sheep into that system where sheep could be quite destructive in a young orchard, they'll go with poultry instead. And poultry also do a really, really great job at grazing, and you can get a similar effect if done properly. I've got a grower that I work with, and they're starting to experiment with rabbits.
Oh
Um,
wow.
so, so there's a lot of creativity happening, but that's a very small percentage of people. The majority are just like barely even thinking about the idea of integrating livestock at all. And there's a lot of barriers there. But what we're seeing is that grazing has such a profound effect on so many positive outcomes in orchard systems on the research side of things, both from a soil health perspective, a carbon and nutrient cycling perspective, as well as an integrated pest management perspective. So they're really good tools. They're really great tools to use for growers.
And I absolutely love the way you brought that up because what you're really discussing is the circular system. And one of the things I work with a guy and he says, the best books about agriculture are 100 or 200 years old, and it's they had to use these systems in order to get the most out of the land. But one of the things as we transition to different systems, whether it's industrial or whatever you want to call it, a lot of these connections have been broken. So
Mhm.
these solutions just aren't available in certain communities. And when you look and you ask the question, well, why doesn't everyone use sheep? Well, if you bring sheep onto a vineyard, they still have to make money off of them. So the
Mhm.
interesting thing is when you find it, what I found anyway is there's a great backstory behind every new innovation. So with the vats, there was a great backstory, but with their sheep too. And I think they contracted out, but there's always something where they're making money off it or there's an added benefit. They can't add an input that increases costs. So I
Mhm.
think that overall is just one of the challenges. Um, with anybody that's looking to make that jump, because you said it's a tier, I'm thinking of different tiers or different ranks. What would you say to, or what have you seen where you look at a farm and you say, okay, you're ready to bring in the sheep, or you have composting, you have great cover crops, you've done a great job with that. What would be an indicator that they're ready to bring that livestock in?
Well, I mean, I think the cool thing about the livestock, and I'll kind of bounce back to what you're talking about with the economic side of things, um, is that there is a lot of indication that those who are using grazing are reducing costs in other ways,
Mm,
particularly like for um, mowing. So you're reducing labor cost for having to go in and mow and manage your biomass. Um, you may be reducing your herbicide cost, right? If you're treating your alleyway vegetation with herbicide. So growers can really think of grazing as a tool that can be taking the place of other things that they might be doing. And that has potential. I'm not going to say it does 100% because we actually don't have a lot of that data. And as a good scientist, I will say we need more data. But it has potential to be economically viable for growers if they're doing it even as a contract. So if they're paying for the service of the contract grazer to come out on their farm and graze, that still may lead to savings because of the other cost reductions that are happening.
So yeah, and honestly, we're partnering with Greenworks, and they have battery operated lawnmowers. So, and I know you know the answer to this, but I'm sure our listeners are thinking, well, why not just get a robot to mow the grass? Why do you need? What are the benefits of having a robot versus a sheep? And because I'm fairly confident the sheep have a better benefits. It's not just about cutting the grass, but what
Mm.
benefits do the sheep offer other than just cutting down the grass?
Yeah. So let's see, where do I start? So there's a really, and I'm going to make this kind of simplified. There's a really big effect from grazing that stimulates a process in the roots where you're increasing carbon sequestration, and you're increasing what we call the active carbon pools in your soil. And that active carbon is the food source for all of your soil micro fauna and flora. So it's what you would just say, it boosts the biology of the soil. It does that by the grazing effect, which is attached to our rhizosphere and the types of root exudates that come off of that rhizosphere. It also does that for urine and manure, right? So as the sheep are consuming the biomass, they're also excreting urine and manure into the soil, and all of that is readily available nutrients. So some of the work that we've done shows, and slightly preliminary, and more work is needed, but we're seeing like about an increase in plant available nitrogen by about 10 pounds or more, and then total nitrogen in the soil doesn't change. So what that says is that we're not changing the nitrogen pool, but we're cycling it faster. And that's the manure and the urine. And then the carbon is very significantly higher in those sites as well. And then the other thing that we're showing, which is quite interesting, in our area, there's navel orangeworm is a really big pest for farmers, particularly pistachio producers and almond orchards. And there is a lot of work that shows, growers spend a lot of money and a lot of time on the sanitization process of these fields in order to get old mummies out of the farm in order to decrease the life cycle of these navel orangeworms. And guess what? Sheep love to eat mummies.
Oh,
So
wow.
they're doing a really good job of helping with that sanitization process, and coming in and eating those old dropped mummies from last year, which harvest the navel orangeworm. So there's even some pest management support there as well.
Wow. So I'm a farmer in California, and I want to get engaged or involved. I know that you're the top of the pyramid. There's a lot of resources and a lot of things that farmers can get from the extension office. How can farmers, in addition to contacting you, what other resources are out there for them to help make that transition?
Yeah, we have a pretty amazing network of growers right now in my region of California called the Farmer Ag Network. And they are a farmer-driven group that is trying to build mentorship, it's trying to build connectivity, it's trying to support, knowledge hubs, and it's farmer to farmer. So I always promote them as a fantastic contact. The key thing you can do is build your social network and really find the growers that are doing this, help each other problem solve, build up each other's knowledge and capacity. Yeah, this is what I find to be so, so important. Besides that, California has a lot of incentive programs right now that are helping to pay for these practices. And that can be through the California Department of Food and Ag, CDFA, they're going to be rolling out their Healthy Soils program this year again, which has a large laundry list of practices that we consider regenerative, that they will help growers to implement and cover the cost of them. So applying for that is pretty straightforward. Within California, we also have technical assistance providers across the state that help growers apply for those incentive programs, and that is their job. So linking up with those folks will be a key as well to get you making sure that you're applying for those things correctly. And then the last one I'll say is NRCS. USDA NRCS is a huge number of programs to help growers transition. The EQIP program and the Conservation Stewardship program will also help with cost share of a lot of these practices. Yeah.
Are there any complementary industries that you feel are extreme? They're supportive, or they're extremely beneficial to this process? I'm guessing probably composters and soil makers might be, but are there any do you think that kind of jump out in helping farmers make this transition that people can reach out and connect with?
Yeah, a really good question. I mean, there's a ton of nonprofits that are working to try and help, you know, growers um, move in this direction. There's so many. There's Sustainable Conservation, CAF, RCDs, um, kitchen table advisors. Uh, Man, there's a ton of nonprofit organizations that are in this kind of movement and trying to support these transitions. As far as industry goes, depending on what you're growing, the commodity boards can also be very supportive in some of these transitions as well. And Almond Board of California, for example, has a sustainability program. Um, and then just kind of leading off of that, some of the processors might have some programs and incentives as well. I know Blue Diamond does. Um, we're we're trying to, I think, having industry uh, like support or invest in these systems is still something that we need more of. Um, Compost facilities are now going to have more pressure from the state, right, to do a better job at circulating organic waste. And counties are going to be pressured more to make sure they're pushing their organic waste into compost facilities. And so we're trying to think about mechanisms for how that can make it easier to move, therefore, compost from compost facilities onto farms, right? In order to, like you said before, close that cycle. Um, but there's some challenges there as well. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, when you said it's complicated, I'm the like I think I told you at the beginning, I'm the president of the Arizona Compost Council, and when we looked at any kind of policy for the state, the standard or response was it depends. Whether you're a producer in a rural area or right in the city, there's just
Mhm.
parts of the state that don't have access. So I'm sure the same challenges are in California, and I think you've done a great job of describing that all of these commodities are dependent on each other. And if
Mhm.
there are gaps, then it makes it hard to adopt these practices. So the last question is kind of a curveball, but it's always one that I like to ask. And I know it's sometimes hard to ask because of your position or title, but where do you want to see these efforts going in order to help these farmers? The common response I'll give you, I hear a lot, is there has to be something that mitigates the risk. Um,
Yeah.
when you think of a farmer, they're really putting their family business on the line to make this transition, and it's great. So that's a common response. But in general, what do you really want to see in order to move this forward? Without giving you any more answers.
I would say, oh, okay. I think we need a few things. I think one is we desperately need the marketing and the supply chains to catch up. Without them, we're not going to be able to scale up adoption. Um, the burden for marketing can't lie on growers to find the markets to get an increase in their own premium. There needs to be some incentive coming from the supply chains for these commodity crops um, to support growers in getting a higher price or a premium of some kind. That's like kind of following the tracks of the organic movement. And I know that's a little bit contentious sometimes. I don't think it's going to ever be like the organic certification. I think that is We're not going to actually end up getting there. It's going to look different than that. But without right now, as it is, growers that are doing have some type of like certification through ROA or Regenified, some kind of verification program. Basically, they have to find their own markets and they have to create their own marketing to really push their products, or move into more secondary product like space, right? Which is not feasible for most growers to do. So that's got to change. The second thing that I would say is that I would really like to see, and kind of connected to this, and avenues for what you would call participatory guarantee systems. So this is like basically farmer cooperatives coming together, or farmer-based organizations that come together, define their own outcome protocols, define their practice requirements, and then based on their own co-developed, basically their own co-developed certification verifications, they pool their products together in order to push something new into the market, and leverage that cooperative type of model. And then the third, I really want to see more carrots. The term carrots in terms of more incentives coming from policy and coming from private industry and sector, and we need to remove the regulation and the disincentives framework and provide more incentive frameworks to get growers to be able to push through into these integrative systems.
I 100% agree with all your answers, and it's really interesting because the Arizona Compost Council, we saw the same problem. We saw that a lot of our growers struggle with marketing, and when we talked, or not growers, producers, and when we talked to them, they said, "Hey, you know what? It's hard for us to describe our product, which is organic, versus one that's synthetic. We're more expensive, but it's the education piece that they have a hard time doing. Beyond, in addition to that, the fact that there's a season for mulch compost to go out, and a lot of our producers don't understand that either. So we're actually partnering. I got to give a shout out to Thunderbird School of Global Management. They're going to do a marketing plan for the Arizona Compost Council. So they're interviewing elected officials, and we're going to push it out. And it's going to be a 12-month marketing cycle that really is heavy on education, because we find our own producers, they bought into it, but again, they know a slice of the pie. They don't see the whole system. So giving them that resource where they can go out or they could push stuff out on social media that helps to educate our community on why compost is so important. I mean, we're in the desert. We're saying that we're the one of the solutions for water shortage, but nobody knows about it. It seems like we have the same conversation every day. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And we are also doing a policy recommendation. So we're right on the same page. Well, Sara, this was such a great conversation. I really enjoy spending time with you. Love to hear what you're doing in the field. We're going to reach out to you and get pictures and photos and contacts, but I'm going to go ahead and close out. And again, I wanted to say thank you. So we're here with Dr. Sara Rosenberg, works at University of California, and really offers a valuable bridge between research and real-world applications for regenerative farming. The key takeaway isn't that these changes are most powerful when people connect, and their practices are learned and taught in order to help overcome some of these barriers. So please make sure to like and to subscribe. And Sara, I have a feeling that our paths might cross again. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks so much, Joe.
All right, have a good one.
Thank you for joining the Harvesting Wisdom podcast. Click subscribe and like for ongoing insightful conversations. Explore our webpage for show notes and additional resources. Visit our guests' webpage for deeper insights. Your engagement is the foundation of our journey, and until next time, keep pursuing wisdom.